All right, this meeting of the Westborough Diversity and Inclusion Committee will be conducted on Wednesday, May 11th, 2022 at 3:30 p.m. in person at Great Hall in the Forbes Municipal Building. The meeting will also be broadcast live in real time via Westborough TV on local cable Verizon Channel 28 and Charter Channel 192, and on their online platforms at westboroughTV.org and youtube.com/WestboroughTV. Members of the public may speak at the meeting during open forum, as noted in the guidelines attached to the agenda. And if people want to contribute to this meeting outside of open forum, they can contact me, the chairperson, in advance of meetings to make arrangements. You can email the committee by emailing diversity@town.westborough.ma.us or call me, the chairperson, at 508-366-3090. All right. So nice to see all of you in person. It's been a bit. It's really nice. We'll start with open forum. Either of you want to speak in open forum? No? Okay. All right. It's an opportunity for members of the public to come forward and talk about anything that they think is relevant to this committee. And we have it at the beginning of all of our meetings. And so, since you are the members of the public here today, I wanted to extend the invitation. So we'll move on to the next agenda item then, which is minutes. So we have two sets of minutes that we are looking at, January 20th and March 3rd. We're missing minutes in February because those are still in process. If you remember, those meetings in February were special meetings, and so it's just getting them finalized proving challenging, but we're getting there. So so I welcome a motion to approve minutes.
Do you have a copy of the minutes?
Oh,
I can give them one. That's the, yeah.
there we go. Of the agenda or minutes?
Oh,
I just needed one, really.
You can take one, you can come get mine when you're done, when we're done. Take with you to say, yeah. For people who are viewing this from outside, we have two lovely high school students or recent graduates,
Seniors.
soon to be graduates.
High school seniors.
High school seniors with us today. All right, a motion to approve. So we'll take a motion, a second, and then discussion about specific changes. I'm learning this process after 2-3 years of doing this. Do I have a motion? Okay, a motion to approve in a second. Okay. You're writing that down, Kim, since Sarah's not here. All right, any changes or discussion?
Yeah, for the March meeting, my name was not added to the present list.
Okay. Which means you probably need it added. Oh, your name is on the voting list, just not on the present list. Okay. So I would be looking then, any other discussion or corrections?
Are you taking them together or each set separately?
Does it matter? Okay, we're doing them together. Any comments on either one?
No.
All right, do I need a revised motion to accept as suggested with the
That'll be
change?
reflected.
Okay, all right. So we're all here in presence, so if you are in favor of the motion, raise your hand. All right, 7. Yep, 7. All right. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, sorry I'm late.
Great, I'm glad you made it. Okay, that's done. Okay. Community issues and announcements. I personally have a couple, and then I'll happily hear what other announcements are. So last night, Police Chief Jeff Laurie spoke at the Select Board meeting. I went to hear him speak just a few minutes to acknowledge that recently residents have brought to our attention as town leaders that there have been some stickers placed on public property that have hateful connotations. And The police chief wanted to assure the community that the police are investigating these situations. And the select board and the police chief wanted to really message to the community that hate is not tolerated in Westborough. The chief really wanted to have the takeaway message from him be to, if you see something, to say something. They are requesting that if you see any defacing of property or any items that represent something hateful, that you report it to the police, the non-emergency line. Call as soon as you see it, call the non-emergency line, and they'll send someone to investigate that situation. So I've been very disappointed to learn about this, but I feel like the town manager's office and the select board, my department, Youth and Family Services, and this committee, are all kind of on top of it with the same message saying we are not going to tolerate this and it will be investigated. And other announcements, May is Mental Health Awareness Month. So on behalf of Youth and Family Services, we are doing a ton of promotion to destigmatize the conversation about mental health. We know that mental health struggles are very much coincide with people's experiences of marginalization and oppression, and so I think it's relevant always to talk about both when we're in at these platforms. So please take a look. I hope you will start seeing things. We're passing out resource lists, mental health resource lists, both electronically, and there'll be ones available at the library. They're available in 4 languages. We are advertising that our department hosts an online screening tool where people can take free mental health screenings. And there's a variety of different types of screenings for adults and for parents. And we're just really trying to get the conversation out. If you know of anybody who wants to learn more about Youth and Family Services or just talk about the status of mental health in Westborough, please invite them to join me for Coffee with Kara on the library lawn on Wednesday, May 24th from 10:30 to 12. And hopefully you'll see all of these things advertised. We're getting them out slowly but surely over the next few days. Any other announcements?
Yeah, I have one. I've been asked by the Central Massachusetts Connections and Faith to announce the 2022 spring event. They're introducing the Baha'i faith at the Good Shepherd Lutheran Church on Sunday, May 15th from 4 p.m. to 7 p.m.
Cool.
Everybody's welcome.
That is great.
Kara, can I just,
Yeah.
can you confirm the date? You said the Coffee with Kara. Is it Wednesday?
Wednesday, the 24th?
5th?
25th, thank you. It's Wednesday. That's what I should look at my calendar. It's Wednesday, the 25th, 10:30 to 12. Yes, on a library lawn or inside the library if there's bad weather. I'll also announce that the senior center is going to be the site of a special event hosted by Out Metro West, which is a nonprofit organization out of Framingham that serves LGBTQ plus youth. And they are starting satellite programs outside of Framingham, and they've wanted to do one here in Westborough for some time. So on Friday night, June 3rd, from 6:30 to 8:30 at the senior center, youth from Westborough and the surrounding communities, anyone from around here who identifies as LGBTQ+, is welcome to go to the senior center for a social evening. They do want us to express that they are requiring masks and they do require proof of vaccination. Any other announcements? So, Indigenous Peoples Day. We have not seen each other since those very intense meetings that we had or since town meeting. So I'm guessing you're all up to speed, but just for the sake of the process, I'll tell you formally that the motion that we deliberated on, that was the citizens' petition to pass Indigenous Peoples Day in the town of Westborough, long story short, did not pass in town meeting. between our last meeting about the topic and town meeting, I had the opportunity to meet with Lisa Edinburgh again, who was the citizen who put the petition forward, and with two members of the Nipmuc tribe, and the Nipmuc tribe is the indigenous tribe that is indigenous to this area. And they gave their they gave their blessing. They said they wanted the petition to pass. As I said at town meeting, if you heard my statement, and I think I shared it with you, I don't know how or if that new information would have impacted the conversation we had here. We can only speculate. But I thought that was interesting to know. They were explicit, however, that they see the Nipmuc leaders that we met with were explicit that they see no room for a sharing of Indigenous Peoples' Day and Columbus Day. So despite that, they did offer a letter of support for the petition, but they were very, very explicit about that. So what does that mean for us? I'm not really sure. That's for us to talk about and decide. Hold on just a minute. It's not typical that people participate, right? But I will, it's okay. I'll make room for questions. Since I know you have a question, I will absolutely invite you into the conversation. But thank you. I'm glad you're engaged. So, and we're going to talk later in today's meeting about the committee's structure and term limits and other things about like where to go from here with the committee. And so this might be kind of related to that, but sort of figuring out what is the extent and limits of our scope, of our involvement given our scope. What I do feel, what we did sort of say to the public is that we aren't closing this conversation, that this is something we want as a committee to continue to pursue, but to what capacity, I'm not really sure. So I guess that's where I bring it to you. And I welcome your comments about any part of that. But I will invite your comment or question, if you don't mind.
I know that on our school calendar, it's listed as Indigenous Peoples' Day, but we're talking about in our class how the Westborough town calendar still identifies it as Columbus Day. So I was wondering, how does the school identify it as one thing that the town doesn't? Because it's like a public school ran by the town and stuff.
Thank you for the question. I'll repeat it just so folks watching can hear it. The comment is that the schools recognize Indigenous Peoples' Day as its own holiday, but that is not what the town calendar says, and the town doesn't recognize, and so why is there the discrepancy? And when we know on our committee that we've talked a lot about that, the town has the school committee is the one who passed that, and that's a very separate governmental process than what the town at large does. And so that's a simple answer to the question. I think, part of the layers of this conversation are that there are pockets of the town that are very excited about seeing this move forward and celebrating and honoring Indigenous Peoples' Day. And there are pockets of the town who come out to vote at town meeting who are not in support of that. Or I want to think ready for it, don't see the value of it yet. I feel optimistic that change can come, right? But yeah, so what is our role in that? What is our place in that? What do y'all think?
I think when we first had talked about it, we were saying that we're going to educate the people later on. But I remember you saying that I think the education part needs to come first. So then, that way then, people who are not interested or not really into it can, see the value of it and then maybe vote on it again or take it to the town selectmen's again. And yeah, so I think the education part I definitely agree that needs to come first. And I don't know how we go about it, maybe giving out flyers, and especially make that time, the October month, a whole month of education, offering different programs through the library, through the youth services. So, just try to get everyone on board.
A good idea.
So by attending the meeting, I learned something about the people that are not ready yet for the change. I think we also need to hear them out. I got to do that while I was at the town meeting, and I think that was a big part missing with what we did. It really made me refocus what we should be doing, the steps. So yeah, I think we should continue to focus on that bit as well. I also feel like we have a lot of groups in town that are individually working on this. We should also go and learn from everyone first, what's been done, what's worked, what's not worked, and then we should regroup and then try to see what, where we can, and of course ask them how we can assist them. Because I think after the vote being denied, I think we should start in a different way, and we should individually help people if we could, like by listening to them, by bringing major topics up here and discussing it, but somehow connecting those groups, forming more momentum, like Khala said, more education, connecting with every side of it, and then decide to move forward with whatever we come up with.
So just for a little bit of clarification for those of us who were not able to attend the town meeting, was there anything in a nutshell that you could have pointed to that everybody was sort of in agreement on in terms of why they would not support this or what they're...
It wasn't just one thing.
Okay.
So the way, so many, there were people in hordes that were there. Everybody had a different story. Someone reflected over the history. Someone was just very passionate and what it meant for them. So, there were just so many different aspects of what I heard. It's not like I didn't know people felt that way, but to hear why they felt that way was really very enlightening for me. I don't agree with everything that was said, but I can certainly empathize more. I think it really is beneficial for all of us to hear it. So yeah, if anybody has not attended the meeting, definitely go hear it. Because I can throw education at one person, but if I don't know where they're coming from, they will not listen to it. Because we are not relating on the same level. So I just feel after that meeting, sort of, and hearing more from everybody will make us relate to them better and educate them better.
I agree with what all of you just said. I think the other thing is that I think it became really emotional and that, those emotions bring in, it just makes it harder to have those conversations, I think, Shazia. So I think having a meeting or a town, where people can come in and talk about that where there's no stakes, we're not voting on anything, we're listening to each other. I think that would be really helpful. I think that's a really good point. And I think having, the vote sort of at the end of that just heightens everyone's emotions. And because you're in a situation where you are literally taking a side. And so in that case, if we can have more of a listening of people sort of sharing why is it important to them on both in all the sort of facets, I think that would be beneficial. Because I think people it was interesting. People are kind of almost closer to each other than I think we realize. Everyone has their own perspective of why this is an important thing, and I think finding the shared experiences there would be really interesting.
I think it could be powerful. We've talked about it here before, that the way that change happens is with trust and relationship building,
Yeah.
right? So we can kind of come to a place of shared understanding. Yeah. So this is, I only want to give this another couple minutes today, but this is sort of seed planting for the future. And so kind of acknowledging that the time of the committee members that sit on this committee is limited. to sort of the time that we spend here each month with a little extra here and there on the side. So let us think about how we can make recommendations for sort of sharing this work with the community, whether that be to, recommend that the select board host a listening session, or recommend that we host a listening session, either either we schedule a special one or we do it at a meeting, or thinking about what format educational sessions would take, and when and how and who would do that, and who else needs to be part of that conversation. So just recognizing that our capacity to take the lead on that might be really limited, but that we are sort of the public face of this, so we can be the communicators, and we can provide a forum and that kind of thing. So just in future meetings, let's think about where our priorities are and what makes sense as next steps. Yeah.
So something I've raised before, and I think that this is something that we can do that will be positive, is to acknowledge the Indigenous people on whose land we are meeting at the beginning of each meeting. I've recently done some research into my particular field and gone to Australian institutions of higher learning, and on all of their web pages, they acknowledge the tribes of people specifically on whose land their institute sits, and show respect to that. And just as a committee, we could acknowledge that at the beginning of each meeting, and that becomes something concrete that reinforces the message of respect and acknowledgement from this committee. And then I wonder if we've put so much effort into this discussion, whether there's something we can actually do that's concrete that supports the Indigenous people in our community, rather than just talk about it. Because I think that the kids in our school system are going to come through that school system with a different view to that of the Italian Americans that hold Columbus dearly. Mm-hmm. And somewhat naughtily, I've heard it said that Columbus Day should be acknowledged and celebrated by getting lost in a supermarket looking for the spice section, right? Because that's essentially what Christopher Columbus did. Perhaps we can just let it go and move on to do something that's more concrete.
So I love the idea of developing a land acknowledgement. In my own research around doing land acknowledgements, it is advised by all of the kind of tribal folks I talked to and what I read, that we do so in a very thoughtful process that really engages the whole town. And some towns have even taken land acknowledgements to town meeting to decide upon. That it should be done in the context of the bigger picture, and not just because we think it's a good idea on our own. So I think we should very seriously consider that, and what recommendations we make around that, and what leadership we take around it, and think about that moving forward. I love the idea of concrete things to honor Indigenous people. Again, whether that's something that how much we do in the scope of, within our scope, I'm not sure, but we can at least bring things forward. Like I've learned through this whole research process about certain days of recognition and things that can be done to honor Indigenous people and all that they went through and go through. And so I can bring some of those ideas to, and if nothing else, we can share them amongst each other and inform the community about those and see what we can do. So.
Sarah, can you talk a little bit more about that recommendation for, what would that look like when you're saying the recommendation is for it to be a very thoughtful process and sort of townwide? And can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, I mean, other towns have done it, and other institutions. Like, for example, one of the ones I came across is UMass. Has a land acknowledgement, and they formed a task force to really learn about the history of the people on whose land we now are, to really inform themselves and make sure it's an educated process. And then they consulted with Indigenous people to form the words that they would use. And then they say that before every event or every meeting. I was in Arlington last week for a meeting in in town, one of the town buildings with town employees, and they started the meeting with a land acknowledgement. And I know from them that they went through a process that had a task force and did a lot of research and consultation, and then it actually went before town meeting and was voted on. Every town is different how the charter is set up, that whether or not it would have to be done that way, but that's just an example.
Thank you.
Yeah.
In terms of something concrete and overlaps with another item that we have on the agenda, I've mentioned before that it's my experience that many of the needing people in our community aren't aware of the services that are provided by the community. And perhaps that's something that we can tie into this, so that Indigenous people, recent migrants, and others are aware of what Westborough has to offer them, because many of them are not aware.
Yeah. Yes. We need to figure out ways to do that. So yes, high priority. All right, so we'll put that on the agenda for June for a follow-up conversation about what our next steps, and we'll just keep talking about it until we figure something out. All right. Committee membership and term limits. So now, a few things have happened that have spurred the need for this conversation. And the main one is that the select board and the town manager's office have been working very diligently within the last, I would say, year or so to kind of tighten up things around committee structure and trying to get things to be consistent across committees and boards. Do you think that's fair to say, Kim, as one of those people who's working on that? So out of that came the committee handbook that I shared with you all, and I'm sure you read every page of it. And, but it was informative. And then more recently, we got notification from the town manager that one of the pieces that needs to be established and enforced is term limits. That's all part of, the governance. And so this committee has never had term limits, apparently. So our task, we have a couple of tasks today. One is to decide on our term limits and what they're gonna be and who's gonna be terming out at what point. So that's one thing we need to do concretely. And then along with that is a larger discussion about sort of this committee's structure and honing in even more on what our scope is. So before we get into the conversation about term limits, I'm just going to back up a minute and share with you about conversations I've had recently with Christy Williams, the town manager. Kim has joined in on those conversations, but I initiated the conversations with a letter to Christy. When I decided I was going to step down as chair of this committee, I really took a step back and really looked at, what have been the highlights of my time. It's been about 3 years I've been in this role. What has worked well, what has not worked well, and what is confusing, more confusing now than it even was when I was confused to start out with. So I sent a letter to Christy saying, here are my proposals for some changes to the committee that I think would be beneficial to the functioning of the committee. And Christy and Kim and I sat down and looked at those. Christy talked to the select board about some of the ideas that we threw around. So now I want to share those ideas with you and see what you think. And I think that that conversation might precede the term limit conversation because it might change how we think about that. So here are the main points. So right now we have 11 members, a select board representative, the assistant town manager, a police representative who we currently don't have because Mike stepped down, a school representative, a library representative, a youth and family services representative, a senior center representative, and 4 community members, residents. What I am proposing is that we get smaller, which will make it much easier to get a quorum, for one, because we know that getting a quorum is challenging for us because we have to have 6 people. And that we eliminate certain roles for very specific reasons. And please know that this is not personal at all to anybody here, but it's really been a matter of thinking about sort of the power structure of the the committee and just function, like concrete functionality. So my first recommendation was that we no longer have an official voting member from the select board. And please know that Shelby is in support of this, and she has had conversations with Christy about it. She and I have touched base about it. So again, this is not personal. It's not about the individual, but it's about the power structure. So this committee is designed to be an advisory committee to the select board and to the town manager's office. So you can kind of probably predict my next recommendation. But having a select board member on a committee that is advisory to themselves could put that person in a position of a conflict of interest. And it also, whether intentional or not, can influence us, and whether conscious or not, right? Like, the select board makes big decisions for our town, and does that consciously or unconsciously influence how we sway our vote and how we listen to the select board member and what their opinion is? So for that reason, I think that it's best not to have a select board member as a voting person. I still think it's an awesome idea to have a liaison from the select board so that that relationship is there and so the communication is there. So that's one idea.
And that exists. The idea that the select board members have liaison assignments to many board and committees throughout town, that already exists and that's in place. So effectively, this could be, if the group is in support of this, recommending that in lieu of a seat on the committee, that there would be a select board liaison appointed. And at that point, their role is really to come and to listen. It's kind of eyes and ears, and to provide feedback to the select board just on what's going on at the committee level. So
you said that it's already in existence, right, in some of the boards. So how does it function? Is it one person that's been designated that's going to multiple boards, or is it?
So the way it works, they just spent, last week we had a meeting, and they have the list of the boards and committees and who's currently assigned to it, and there's discussion. Does anybody want to change? Is there, what makes sense in terms of workload too, because some boards and committees, even being a liaison, if the board meets more frequently because there's something going on. So they kind of juggle it that way. I am just an example, Economic Development Committee has, a board member has a seat on that committee. Capital Planning Committee, a board member has a seat as a voting member. But then there are other committees to which they have a liaison who's advisory. Senior Council on Aging, they have a liaison. That person attends meetings. They're not required to, but they often attend the meetings and just kind of are kept in the loop of what's going on. Similarly, there's a liaison to the planning board, to the Youth Commission. So again, there's not a requirement that they attend, but it's just sort of an area that they keep tabs on what's going on.
But they do attend sometimes, like the Youth Commission, which advises my department.
But they're not a participant in the meeting.
No, they just come, so they know what's going on, and they report back to the board, and it's a nice relationship to have.
So what is that process by which they report back to the board? I'm just curious how, does this actually function? Because there is some benefit. While I agree with you completely regarding the conflict of interest, and that's always sort of been on my mind about that, I also feel that there's a huge benefit that, it's given all the limited time and everything, that having somebody from the select board here, go ahead.
Just a point sorry to interrupt, but to clarify, but they are here as an individual. So that's sometimes the caution too. They're here voting as an individual. They are not representing the select board's opinion.
But then why would they be identified as a select board?
It's just that's one of the seats on the committee was designated as basically a requirement that it be filled by a member of the select board. It doesn't mean they are coming here representing the select board.
So that's really an important distinction, and I would think that that's actually a misnomer in terms of even putting that in there, because it should, what would be the purpose of having a select board member here and then, basically, so I didn't know that. I thought that she was here on behalf of,
No. Under open meeting law and under they're here as an individual, for the select board to represent the select board view, it has to be as a body, they meet and vote and articulate.
So then, does that also mean that there's no communication that happens between that member and the select board with respect to, okay.
No, there is, and that communication was facilitated. Shelby would often speak at select board meetings and provide an update on what was discussed or, actions taken at this meeting, but it was merely, she was reporting back to the board the actions of this committee. And that didn't automatically, by her being on the committee and taking a vote, that didn't translate into now that's the select board's.
Yeah, that part I got based on, how the votes came out for other things, but,
And so similarly to, whether, as she's done when she's had a formal voting seat on the committee, or if she were to continue in a liaison capacity, back to your earlier question, during every select board agenda, there's the board provides updates, typically at the end of the meeting, correspondence and updates, and often, if there's something to report, they're not required to, but they give highlights of meetings that they may have attended, so they're liaison meetings.
okay. So I really, so I understand that part of it. My opinion is on that I actually really do appreciate the presence of somebody from the select board. I'm a little bit still confused in terms of how the liaison works, since it's not required for them to be here. So they may sometimes show up, they may sometimes not show up. I like the piece that, whether Shelby was speaking individually or not, that communication gap was not there, because automatically what was being discussed here was being translated to the board, and ultimately most of the stuff is going to be taken there anyways. So it's sort of nice, or many of the things that would eventually get there. So that also helps, but that's just something to think about as well.
That is, so as a result of this conversation, whether today or if it's extended, we'll either support these recommendations, make totally different ones, or not support them or whatever, but that will go to the select board, to the town manager, who take it to the select board, and then the town manager and the select board decide if they want to redesign the committee. So it's up to them. But in that, we can make the strong request for a liaison who is present at the vast majority of our meetings. We can say that we see the value of that. We can say exactly what you said, this is an important relationship not to let go. And we like the idea of taking out the potential conflict of interest, but we don't want to remove the relationship.
Absolutely.
So let's make sure we include that in whatever recommendations we make.
Absolutely.
Okay.
So I'll wait till we get to the discussion about my role too.
Okay.
Because that's another.
So we're there now. So
I just have a question.
Oh, yeah.
So so what I just understood is that this committee, Diversity and Inclusion, is an advisory committee to the select board and to the town manager's office. But I'm just going to throw this out there because it's the thought that comes into my head. Wouldn't we have a liaison to the board? And wouldn't we have a liaison to town manager?
That's not.
Do you understand what I'm saying? I know it's not the way it is now.
Yeah.
But I'm wondering about, because Kim, I think you just said that there are some committees in town that will continue to have a select board member as a voting member of their committee. And there are others that will function in the way that currently function in the way that we're talking about. So I guess, why is there that difference in the terms of the way things are set up within committees, and how, I think I'm asking a similar question to yours, Sarah.
Well, I can only speak about this committee because I don't have any experience with the other committees, but the rationale for this committee in particular, in my opinion, is that we're talking about equity here, right? And the kind of advice that we would be giving to the select board is different than the kind of advice that the Economic Development Committee may be giving, just as an example of one of the committees that has, and there might be overlaps, but I think just by the sensitive nature, not just sensitive nature, but when we're really just talking about inclusion and equity, we want to be as conscientious as possible of the power dynamics and set ourselves as equitable a playing field as possible. And so for this committee in particular, to me, my opinion, just doesn't make sense for us to have a select board member on it. Am I addressing your concern or am I missing it?
I'm just thinking about the hierarchy of, the sort of the way that town government, the hierarchy, right?
Yep.
So, town manager, select board, these are the groups that are making decisions around, globally, meaning for the town, right? And so to have, I guess I'm in agreement with that there needs to be that consistent communication piece, and what is the most effective way of getting that? Is it a liaison? Is it a voting member? And that's what I'm trying to understand, is why do some committees have a voting member from the board?
Right.
Yeah.
It depends
versus a liaison?
Yeah.
That's what I'm trying to understand.
I think Kim can explain it
It
better.
depends on how the committees are set up. Some are required to statutorily.
Yeah.
It depends on who and how and under what authority a committee was established. If it's a regulatory committee, if it's elected. So there are a variety of reasons.
Okay.
And I think where and it also in part depends on sort of the function of a committee. So, we're talking about the master plan implementation committee that will be pulled together, and you will likely have a select board representative sitting on that committee, given the depth and breadth of the scope of that work. So in terms of the communication to the select board, whether or not an individual member has a seat on this committee, I don't know that you're getting, I think there's an opportunity when there's something that this committee wishes to communicate or is wishing for the board to weigh in on or move forward in some way. It's in part up to us as staff supporting the committee to facilitate that, and that's a model that happens with some of the other boards and committees. And I guess what we're also talking about, this is kind of segues into my position, the assistant town manager, and I also serve as the human resources director, coming off of the committee as a voting member.
She's also my supervisor.
And being the staff liaison. And the staff liaison, the staff support of the committee. Again, we have an economic development coordinator who supports the economic development committee. We have the Council on Aging is supported by the director at the senior center. So we have this kind of framework with other boards and committees. And so I would continue to be involved, just in a different capacity, not as a voting member. So I could still help facilitate and coordinate. We're talking about, trying to pull more staff in with subject matter expertise as things come before you. So facilitating and arranging that, but being removed from the voting member. I think the other part of this discussion is, while there's value in having staff, we also really want the strongest voice on this committee to be that of the residents. And so we feel like we can achieve that and maybe help facilitate that voice coming through more strongly by paring back both the size of the committee and changing the representation.
And that speaks to part of the reason I'm stepping down as chairperson. Well, one, my time is up, right, according to the handbook, but I'm not a resident, and I'm a staff person, which also wields a certain amount of power. I'm also a director, which also wields a certain amount of power. I'm also a white lady, which may or may not be best representative of this community. So there's a whole lot of reasons to go into it, and we're not going to get it all right, and we're not going to create the perfect platform, to be the most equitable, but we can make some conscious efforts, and these are just some of the ideas we've come up with to do that.
The other thing is, these could be recommendations, and if the board were to make these changes, there's nothing to say that we don't give it a test run, and then we can always go back. I mean, that's similar to what I feel like this has been an evolution, and it has gotten us to this point. I mean, just to be completely frank, Kara and I had discussion, part of the advantage of reducing the membership and being strategic about what positions come off is how many meetings have we had to cancel because we haven't had a quorum? So just trying to think through improving our ability to actually meet, and some other things kind of led to this point. But it is certainly something that if changes are made, they do not have to be set, they are not set in stone. It's go back to the board and say,
Yeah.
hey.
So again, these are recommendations that you have come up with in your discussion with both Kim and, right?
Kim and
Just so I
Christie, yep,
understand.
they were my ideas about changing the membership brought to Christie and Kim, and then Christie and Kim further discussion by talking about paring down the size of the committee to also help with the quorum issue. And so to continue on that vein, we also, Christie and Kim and I together also came up with a recommendation after consulting with the superintendent for one, that it may not make sense to have a school representative on this committee.
I also don't live in town as well, so.
Okay, well, that's interesting. I love having you here, and your contribution is awesome, and the school has their own process around DEI, and it's a process that's very different than what we're doing, and we want to be more in sync, and so I think the next part of this conversation, after we talk about membership, is how do we structure our work moving forward to keep that relationship with the schools. And then the final recommendation is to not reinstate a representative from the police department, but to create some mechanism for especially the schools and the police, those two in particular, but maybe other departments as well, to engage them regularly, like have them come and give us quarterly reports or bi-monthly reports or what have you. And then, of course, invite them for any special topics that come up that are relevant to them. But that would all take us down to a 7-member, it would take us down to 7 members. So the 3 remaining town representatives would be Youth and Family Services, Senior Center, and the library. And again, like Kim said, we may decide that that's not the right people at the table, that might not be enough people at the table. That's where you all come in and the process of us figuring out as we go.
So I would be inclined to say that, I think that having Kim here is actually amazing and great because she keeps us all in line all the time. But I also...
They'll be here.
Yeah, no, I understand. And I can imagine you're also stretched thin. So there's a lot of stuff there. But I don't know, I cannot seem to wrap my brain around not having... one of the things that was so attractive to me was that there was a select board member on this board because it may be false, but there's some sense of we're getting the message across. And while I understand that she's here in an individual capacity or anybody who would be from that board, hearing the numerous conversations that are happening amongst the members and potentially being here for the open forums and or chiming in where necessary on their side really helps, I feel, as it does impact somebody. So then that gets me to the conflict of interest, which is, I think, the bigger issue for me. That's actually the bigger issue for me, where, okay, so I have a hard time thinking that how can what's being heard on this committee not impact your behavior, on another committee? It's just human, nature to do that. So that's a little bit of, an issue, but I don't know, there's something really, it makes me feel very comfortable that there's somebody that is going to help facilitate that communication, and it's going to be a lot more personal rather than having somebody who's a liaison who may come. And maybe I don't understand their capacity. I just imagine a liaison coming when they can come, taking their notes and being like, okay, well, this is what was said. It's like minutes. And I'm not sure that that's going to help us much,
So for you, the piece about the members' investment
Yeah.
in the committee is powerful.
Yeah.
I also feel that, what Kim described and what you're describing about town employees who are not residents in town, to me is a distinction. Select board members are residents in town.
Yeah, they
who are
are.
obviously invested in town because they've chosen to be elected. And so to me, that makes a difference in terms of how they are and I agree with what you're saying, having someone be present in the meetings for the discussion and participating in the voting, because I think, as we talked about earlier, when you're making a decision like that, yes, you may be representing your own opinions, but it carries through to how you may represent that in other meetings.
It's so, I'm just realizing a really important distinction, which is that there's another piece of this at play here, and I'm a town employee and I'm on this meeting. You know, our scope is about influencing town services, right? And town government, town personnel, that kind of thing. And for that reason, it makes sense to have some employees, personnel here, I think, maybe. But in my role, you know, so my perspective is I'm a town employee. I mean, Kim and I have had this conversation many times, so I'm comfortable saying it, but Kim's my boss, and Shelby's her boss. And so that's a hierarchy right there that is innately, you know, like rife for ickiness, right?
Yeah.
And so we are all we respect each other tremendously as professionals and colleagues and people, so we have worked on it, and I think we have made it work okay. But I have to be completely honest in telling you that when I'm making decisions, when I'm sharing my opinion, when I'm taking a vote, I'm very conscious that my supervisor and her supervisor are aware of that vote. They're professionals. They're not going to consciously treat me any differently when I come to them as a youth and family service director to ask them for something, but unconsciously, you know, like you said, that unconscious like weigh in. So I'm realizing that I thought of that through my lens, not through the lens of a resident who I can see the value. I can hear what you're saying about you have a front row seat with your representative, right? You're sitting at the table with your elected official, whether they're there in that capacity officially or not.
But that's the concern.
Yeah.
That person does now not have, it's an unconscious or conscious, that person is now elevated to a different level at this table versus everybody.
Well, not in the sense of a vote. A vote is a vote, right? I mean,
No, but I think in terms of
the discussion?
weighing the opinion, and if it, you know, and again, we haven't had this experience, but as, you know, we could have a different representative later on, and it could be a very different, it's that dynamic, and is there the potential?
But then the concern that I have is, and I've said this in the beginning, and it's probably maybe we can't have quorums and we're not able to get together, that's a big issue, but like you know, action is so important. Having meetings and us discussing all these ideas and everything is really great, and we do that, but I feel as though executing or, you know, getting it to the next step is a challenge. I think for me, part of knowing that there's a town official here, it's maybe a complete false belief in my mind, but it just helps. I feel as though it's being taken more seriously. Whereas if that were removed, you know, I have a feeling that the dynamic is going to change a little bit.
It will. The dynamic will definitely change, and that piece about inaction or like not really moving things along is another one of the concerns I brought to Christy, because I'm like, we've had some awesome conversations, and the conversations are critical to building trust. And so I see value in all of it, and I'm like, okay, can we do some action? Can we move things along? And so I brought that to Christy too, saying, like, can we have some clarity here about, like, how deep are we supposed to deliberate these tasks in front of us? What are we supposed to be? And not that that's her decision, but it was the town manager who envisioned this committee and set it up. And we will continue to, as a committee, bring to our discussion and to the town leaders anything that the residents bring to our attention that is of concern, or anything that we as members bring up that we think we really need to pay attention to this as a town. But if we don't have pressing issues on the table that we're working on, what else do we need to be doing, and how do we get that? So what is the structure through which we can take action with town services and town government? So another piece of this, just to talk about moving forward, is how do we, what accountability does the town manager have to make sure that we are working with the town department heads, that we are working with the town manager, that we are working with the select board about evolving or influencing services in government. And Christy kind of took it upon herself to say, we, being the town manager and the select board, have a responsibility to communicate with you as a committee and to utilize your expertise to weigh in on all of these issues. And so she kind of made a commitment that she and the select board will also request things of us. Now, we may see those requests as not appropriate for our committee, and we may not, and we don't, there's no obligation there, right? There's no mandate, but just creating like this more structured communication between the leadership and our committee so that we're not sitting here twiddling our thumbs because we want to do this work, right? And to try to scrounge up stuff to do, I mean, or to get direction or to know who do we talk to do what. I mean, so she's, I don't know what that will look like, but I know she took sort of a sense of responsibility for we have a responsibility to work with you and to utilize you in a more active way, for what it's worth.
We came up with some kind of concrete examples of that. I mean, kind of refocusing on what the charge of the committee is internally, looking at services. We have a number of plans and projects. So the Master Plan Implementation Committee, as that group starts meeting and doing their work, what is the role of diversity and inclusion? And are there things that they can bring to this committee for some feedback? Just get some input, get some feedback. We'll be conducting a senior needs assessment that was funded at town meeting. One of the pieces of that work is a survey, and we want to make sure that we have very good and diverse response rate. So can we come to this committee? Can you help us think through how to enhance that? We have other similar initiatives as things go forward. Can department heads be brought in to provide an update and just to get some feedback? And, you know, we're thinking of doing X. Do you have any thoughts on how we make sure this is inclusive? And that's part on us as town staff to, you know, you're thinking about a sidewalk plan. Yeah, is there some role? Like, we have to think more broadly about the things that we want input on, and the diversity and inclusion, you know, there are plans and things that we probably would look at and say, oh, there's not, well, yes, there is an opportunity to bring it and get feedback. You know, we're talking about updating the town's strategic plan at some point, and how do we, you know, what's the role here? I think there are a lot of opportunities for more feedback and thinking and helping us as staff think through some things, and then also help us in the execution and implementation. So that's where it's a little bit, you know, looking back at the charge to look at the services that we deliver and forward with some of these planning initiatives. I think there's a lot of opportunity for feedback.
A lot of opportunity for communicating to the larger community. I think of what you've been saying, yep. Ian, which is having our committee talk to some of these departments and other committees will potentially influence how the community engages with those processes.
And then being able to help us as staff with that outreach.
Yeah.
Excuse the naivety of the new boy here. I'm hearing a lot of thoughtful comments, but a lot of questions. And what I'm not hearing is a clear shared understanding of what our charter is and what we're supposed to be doing, right? I'm not hearing these are the things that we have done and these are the things that we will do. And so I think I get a sense of flailing here a little bit in the conversation. And so it seems to me that we should take a step back and decide what is it we should be doing, who should we be telling what we're doing, and who's going to be asking us questions to go and find out answers from the community. I also think that this question of a quorum is a bit of a furphy. We don't need to reduce the number of people in the committee, we need to reduce the size of a defined quorum and have as many people as we can, but have those people structured in a way that they have projects and tasks that help advance the things that we should be doing. So I just, again, excuse my naivety, but I'm seeing a sort of a lack of direction that's
Yep, the flailing analogy is accurate as far as how I feel and felt often on this committee for the last 3 years. So you're spot on there.
Nobody's ever said that to me before, but thank you.
It's been sort of this constant process of trying to figure out what are we here for and what are we supposed to be doing, and then we've had the things we've been doing, which, Indigenous Peoples Day, this community survey, and the things that led up to that, and that took enormous time. You might guess, but I spend hours outside of this, meeting, doing work behind this, and I'm realizing that that's not. I can, because I'm an employee and I just chip away at my other job to do it, and I love this work, so I'm committed, but it's not really how it's designed, right? And so let's get focused on what can we actually do within the context of these meetings, and a little bit of task outside of it, but we can't expect any of you to devote hours of your time outside of these meetings to the work of this committee, so how do we structure it? So this is a work in progress of figuring it out. I mean, we have our little purpose statement, right, on the bottom of our agenda that's there, and other than that, that's about it. So that's probably some of the work of this committee to figure that out. We started to chip away at that last summer, remember that, or 2 summers ago? I don't know.
I think I personally have an interest in staying with. I think there's a lot to be done with what we were charged with initially, which is to review town services, ensure that they're provided equally and are accessible to all residents, and to identify ways to promote increased diversity and inclusiveness in town services, employment, and volunteer opportunities. And I think in some of the thinking we're doing, we've thought about what that might mean now with a number of these initiatives coming up. And the idea that I think what we're trying to do is help clarify roles and expectations, and it's a lot in this conversation because we're talking about membership, we're talking about kind of what are the things that might be coming before us. So there's a lot of sort of parts that are all related. I think one of the things in terms of our membership, I would like to actually expand the number of folks who we bring in terms of staff who are involved, but do so where it makes sense, where they have either subject matter expertise or it's something that relates to their area. If we start looking at services, we've got a community development department, economic development, we've started to do that. We're trying to get updates. We've heard Zach Bowen, our economic development coordinator, is coming in and giving updates. So I think there's also more opportunity to just invite some of our staff and departments to come in and tell us what they're doing. And then for the committee to give some thought for, is there a role for us to make sure that these are being provided equally and that they're accessible to all? So my thought was, we might pull some of the staff positions off of the formal membership. It doesn't mean those people just go away and aren't active participants. They're just not doing so as a voting member.
I have a question. So do we have to, is there a deadline to decide how many members we want and who we want? Or is that just something that?
I mean, not formally. The thinking is the end of the fiscal year is upon us at the end of June, so that would be an ideal time to do it, just for the sake of consistency with all the other things that happen at the end of the fiscal year.
Yeah, so, because I kind of agree with Ian when he said we should first identify the task that we have to do, then we can identify the people who will be beneficial to the committee.
The challenge with that is that the tasks will be ever-changing.
Right.
And therefore, the people who are relevant may be ever-changing. I don't know, but yeah.
And I think that part of the issue, as I'm reading, the statement, is that it looks sort of like, I feel as though our committee is designed, and I could be wrong, so chime in anytime, to be sort of like a check and balance type of, at least that's how we've been operating. Ultimately, we don't have the authority to take action. We only have the authority to voice our opinions and then potentially come to one opinion as a committee and then potentially present it as a recommendation and then potentially have it stricken down.
Yes.
I find that problematic. I think that there's some value to that for the town because you're getting the outside voices, and you're able to, take those into consideration. On the other hand, I just feel like there's a lack of action on our part. And we can have, I'm fine with having that be a part of our duties, but, it just feels as though it's a lot of time wasted in, taking votes on things that essentially we don't really have any power in executing on. It's really a lot of, and that's a lot of everybody's time. And, and I think part of that is why maybe we're not able to always get a quorum because, if there's an action item on something, then people have they're more inclined to, identify and say, okay, well, this is what, we're going to be doing. And so this is my capacity. This is what I can commit to. But when it's just, it's kind of what he said, actually, the flailing word is just so, it just seems as though we're sort of talking in, this bubble and there's really nothing, there's nothing happening. I mean, that's how I see it, and I could be wrong. And maybe that's because of what he alluded to, that I'm also relatively new on the committee. Maybe there's been things, huge strides that the committee's made that I'm not aware of, and that's possibly the thing. But in terms of the meetings that I've attended and what I've seen, it's just been, I haven't seen any progression in any like specific item that we could actually, we have a good group here that could actually execute on something. And I'm talking about even a small event, like something to make an impact. And I know that we're not charged with that officially. So that's where, it's a little bit tricky in terms of when you talk about scope, because you've mentioned this several times at meetings in terms of, well, what is our scope? So is it limited to like a peer review? Is that what we're doing? And that's it?
It is essentially. And that is where so I think where the value of all the conversation comes in is, and it needs to expand, but is that it's influencing the culture of the town and raising diversity, equity, and inclusion as a higher value to all the people in places and departments and stuff doing services and in government. And so, but as far as how much influence we have on the action, you're right. It is limited to exactly what you said, and unless
It's advisory. It's an
it's advisory,
committee. It's not a policymaking body. It's not a regulatory body. It's advisory to the town manager and to the select board. That's how it was set up.
In that capacity, as advisory, there is work that we can do, and that is maybe we can come up with a list of questions that we ask, departments as they come here, and they're probably the same questions for every department. How are you addressing this specific need? How have you thought about this group? How have you addressed concerns around physical accessibility? Whatever those things are.
Yeah.
That list of questions that, in an advisory capacity, we can kind of point to say, these are the things that we are going to be looking for in your report or in your, recommendations. That's what I feel like we do have an opportunity there. Is there an authority there? No, but I think raising the questions should, bring the awareness to the people who are responsible for making those reports and making those recommendations to the town manager and to the select board. I feel like that is our scope.
Yep. Exactly.
So if that's our scope and we know that we are contained within that scope, let's do everything that we can to make that the most, value added to those committees.
And we can do things like present to the select board outside of a proposal, but just present to them, we're ready to do this work and we want you to take us seriously, or whatever, we could do a little PR for ourselves with both those that we are advising and all of those that we could impact in the town.
But I think one of the things to Donna, I think the way you framed it just helped me think of the fact that if we are having interaction with staff, with the department heads, with staff who are they're the ones directly providing the services, The operational work, that's the place where we're going to actually have some success, because the board doesn't direct operations. The board operates at a policy level. So there will be some things that we will take the board to and ask for a policy to be addressed at a policy level. But to the extent that we can really affect change, maybe in these discussions with department heads or those who are providing, they're at the direct service level. And, we start to build those relationships and that trust.
So then another proposal, or rather than proposal formally, another idea would be, so I recently just got into the housing committee and and they only meet when there is something to meet for. I mean, that's another sort of thing to think about, is if we have, initiative at hand that needs to be discussed, then we meet for that purpose. Because because I would imagine that we'd need to have somebody present from a committee, or somebody come or have an initiative at hand that we're discussing and reviewing, for us to have something, tangible to actually,
Yeah, and I think what those could be, I mean, while I would recommend, continuity of meetings just to keep the rapport and the momentum going on this group, but that might be the role of the chair people to make sure that, like, we invite a department head or we invite a committee to come talk to us about the work of the master plan implementation or something like that. So that it is really focused, because we have been a little all over the place since you two started, since you three started, I mean, it's been kind of, all over the place.
I know that we're going way over time here for this agenda item, but and I don't think we've solved the issue of committee membership.
Yeah.
But I think the term limit's a really easy one. 3 years.
So I just want to be cautious. We're saying term limits. There are not actually term limits. It would be terms.
Terms.
So
Okay,
establishing
thank you.
terms.
Yes. That's probably my,
So if it's a 3-year term, someone could choose to re-up, and then it would go back, it's not automatic. At the end of 3 years, someone would have to express an interest in being reappointed, and if there were other folks, somebody else might get a turn on the committee. So it's just establishing a fixed term, because right now there are indefinite appointments.
yeah, thank you for clarifying that. Just real quick before we shift, so I'm just conscious, we're not going to get into a substantial conversation about the community survey. We're just not going to. So we'll have to kind of defer that. But what I do want to say about that is that, as we discussed, if we do persuade this town to move forward with a community survey, if we decide that's still a priority and we manage to get that moving forward, then the outcome of that survey would include recommendations for, direction for this committee too. Now, I know that that's a year down the road. And so this kind of structure we're proposing is sort of, what do we do right now while we're figuring it out? And it can be evolved anytime. But I just want to keep that in mind, that the idea is that the community survey will inform not only this committee, but just like the structure of how DEI is implemented and looked at in the town. All right, so terms. I guess I have a question first. When we're thinking about terms, we want to think about the terms for the people who are on the committee. I don't necessarily hear that we're in a position to make a decision about what we'd like to support as far as structure or not. Maybe we need to talk about that more, maybe we don't, maybe we just need to sit on it, maybe we are ready, but do we need to make that decision about structure before we decide who has what terms? No, we can just decide who has what terms. And then just the people, like, if a school representative is no longer here, then what we decided for Sarah's term is no longer relevant.
Correct.
Okay,
I
all
think,
right.
it can be structured. One way to do it is to just identify that you would use staggered terms. And then we don't necessarily have to assign a name to a term right now.
Okay.
But just if we're in favor of having staggered terms, so that if there is turnover, it doesn't happen all at once. To me, that's the biggest benefit of the staggered terms.
Great.
And, are people looking at what are people comfortable with? 2-year, 3-year?
You threw out 3-year. Was that just arbitrary, or do you have thoughts behind what that would
On
be?
the table to discuss, but if we
Okay.
divide the group into the third that have been on the committee the longest and say their term ends in 1 year,
Yeah.
and after that a 3-year term,
Yeah.
and then the next third come to an end in 2 years, and the next third come.
Yeah, exactly.
That just rolls on.
Yeah, that's exactly how we'll do it. And I guess my question is, does it matter if it's 3-year term or a 2-year term?
Does it matter whether we have a queue of people waiting to join the committee to fill that spot, for example?
Yeah, and we might, like, I get inquiries every now and then.
Ian, I'm sorry, is your question, could somebody who may have an interest in being reappointed express that interest but lose their seat if there's out? Yes, I believe the way the committee handbook is written, that at that point, if there are other folks who are interested, there would be consideration of potentially not reappointing someone.
Substitution.
All right.
Can I, just in terms
Yeah,
of other
yeah.
committees, is it 3-year term or?
Some have 3,
It
some have 2.
hasn't
Some
been.
people have 3-year terms and 2-year terms on their same committee. Like, I don't know,
Yeah.
it's all.
So I think what
We
this
just
is,
decide what we want to do.
just, there has been no consistency.
Okay.
But the idea, and part of this, again, is trying to help just frame expectations so that when somebody gets appointed, they have an understanding both of what's the commitment level, you know, how heavy of a lift, what's the workload. And, you know, this is not intended to be another full or part-time job. You know, you're volunteering your time, so trying to be respectful of that and just help.
That point, one of the things that I'm also conscious of is that we don't seem to have a way to capture the knowledge and experience of people other than middle-class, professional, educated people who've got an hour and a half to spend on a beautiful spring day inside, right? How do we get input from, I mean, a survey's one thing, but having a group of people that can be engaged, is that
Yeah,
possible?
I mean, let's keep working on that. I don't mean to be dismissive. That should be at the forefront of all the conversations about how do we engage more people and the people who haven't been engaged. I mean, I will say that when I started on this committee looks entirely different. And I don't just mean that, I mean, it's different as far as, you know, the racial makeup. It's different as far as the, how many staff versus how many community members. It's different as far as what people's backgrounds and experiences are that they bring to the table. So we really have, like, it's a process, right? And we should continue, we shouldn't stop trying to really pursue more inclusion. But I do think just the fact that terms will turn over and there will be opportunities that, and maybe that behooves us to have a 2-year term so there's more turnover and there's more opportunity for people. But I don't really have a strong
But
opinion about it.
at the same time, Kara, if you have 2-year term, like the process for this committee to take time to actually meet and then talk about stuff and then vote on, that takes a while. So
Yeah.
if you have a turnover 2 years, the new person coming in, he's like, okay, what's going on? And then you have to kind of restart. in
Yeah,
a
the
way.
longevity could be.
And make them watch all the meetings before.
Ian, and just to your point in terms of getting more widespread feedback, I think the types of things we're looking to get that feedback, to find those opportunities in work that's being done by the town. So again, you've heard me talk about it, it's a project, that senior needs assessment. So we want that to be more inclusive. So I feel like this committee needs to provide input and weigh in on the work that the town is doing and how that work is more inclusive. So that's where I think potentially thinking about getting folks in front of you to give you a heads up on what's on their work plan for the coming year. And then, we've got a very active, we've got a climate action plan, and there's a lot of activity around that. And how do we make sure? So I think we need to understand what are the existing projects and work that's being done, and then find opportunities for this to become part of that stuff that's already out there. I'm not being very eloquent.
Is it possible to have that be the job of a liaison from either the town manager's office or from the select board? in terms,
It
so
wouldn't
that,
be the select board, it would be staff would help work through identification.
Okay.
Kind of what are the major initiatives that are coming through, and then what are some of the goals? So for instance, every year the select board sets goals. They have their goals, we have, they have goals they assign to the town manager. So I think there are things we could pull from and try to bring both a manageable number, both in terms of the number of things as well as sort of the scope of the depth of the.
so when you say staff, I mean, just for the sake of, so it would be like, for example, you and Kara in this instance, where you would be presenting us with what the current,
We wouldn't, we would be
COLA.
we would facilitate identifying and for
yeah,
instance.
that's all I'm talking about, is getting, identifying those items.
Totally.
Because it's hard, it's obviously more challenging for us to have to,
Yeah,
go to the
that's-
different departments.
No,
but
that's not the role of the volunteer members. And when you
Okay.
look at the charge and the
Okay.
fact that what it's focused on, that's ideally suited for my position. to be
And now that we're talking in this way, I can think of, oh yeah, I was on that committee and I know that this is happening and I know that's happening and we could really have a voice in all those things. So I just haven't put it together, right? Like I haven't thought about bringing those things here because we didn't have that structure. We hadn't defined it, so. But yeah,
I think that would be really helpful.
yeah. I do too.
And I think just there's value in the discussion and even those updates, because it's not just the conversation here, it's the fact that people watch the meetings and it's a way to get the word out. So for instance, when Zach, our economic development coordinator, came and talked about some of the opportunities that they're looking at for minority and women-owned businesses and that there are grant opportunities, it's great because there are people who watch the meeting and the word gets out. So I think there's value in just that communication, enhancing the.
So is there like a project list of, currently what's going on and what's planned that can be shared with this
A
committee?
formal one, probably
I mean,
not formally
no,
put
but-
together, but I mean, we know, we can look through various documents and probably pull some things
Because
together.
I think that would be helpful to have a list, so then we can add it to,
Absolutely.
out on our calendar as we go through our monthly meetings and just have a guest speaker.
Yeah, I
I love
totally.
it. I think we can come up with a list pretty easily. All right, we have less than 10 minutes left, so here's what I want to do in the last 10 minutes. I want to kind of carve out our agenda for next month so we can do some of this stuff. One is to vote on a new chairperson or people, which, Donna and Shazia, it's no secret, have stepped up and are prepared to do that if the whole committee sees that that would be the right fit. So we want to do that next month. We want to solidify our recommendation to the town manager and the select board about the committee structure. And we want to touch base about the community survey. Now, with all of that said, we're getting into summertime soon. Thank goodness, summer is coming. But it also means that government slows down because everybody, everything
Actually
changes.
We don't.
We don't. We don't. But the productiveness of committees, so I just want to be totally candid, right? If we try to schedule 2 summer meetings, July and August, inevitably one of those will get canceled for lack of quorum. It's just every committee and every year, I think that's happened. So do we even plan to meet through the summer, or do we plan to take July and August off, or do we plan to take either July or August off and then kind of hit the ground running in September with this list of, of tasks or activities and the new structure and whatever. So what is your thought about that? We are having a June meeting, that's already set. Yes. Yeah.
I would recommend that we have the June meeting, we finalize the details that you just talked about in
Yeah.
terms of the committee structure, makeup. I'd like to throw in there, just because I'm speaking, let's add some more town members. If we have 4, let's, rather than cutting us down, let's add to
You mean
it.
residents, right?
Yeah, add more seats for residents. So maybe we're a committee of 9, and we have the rolling structure that Ian just talked about, 333, every year just rolls off. So that, I'm just throwing that out there. What I'm really saying is, let's go with that agenda for June, and then in August, I think it'd be great if we took a look at the list of projects and come up with a list of questions that we that are common questions that we might, and I think having the project list will spark the conversation. And we'll take that time in August so that when we come back full speed in September, we're ready to go.
I like that proposition. What do y'all think?
Agree.
So not meet in July, meet in August as a prep for September, hit the ground running in September.
And would a list of projects be available for August?
I'm not sure if Christie answered one of the points that Ian brought up about having a smaller quorum as well. I mean, I think we should stick to what.
Oh, I'm sorry, we didn't hit that, but that's like
That's
the law.
Bylaw, no?
I don't know, it's not something we have control over.
Okay.
No, we don't. Under open meeting law, we're required
Yeah.
to, the quorum is,
One more than half, or whatever, at least half.
Majority.
The majority, yeah.
I missed the whole.
The quorum,
You asked about a
it has
smaller
to,
quorum.
Needs to be.
by law, it has to be a majority of voting members.
so if you had a 9-member committee, it
have
has to
5.
be 5.
Yeah, and that includes, so if we have vacancies, we have to count those vacancies. So even though right now we only have 10 people, we still have to have a 6-person quorum.
Oh, I didn't know you count the vacancy. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, all right.
Then we reduce the size and have people sitting there.
Yeah, I mean, honestly, that's kind of how it used to be, like, not the
Ex officio
reduced size, but
members.
there were a lot of people who kind of sat and they participated. I would love to see that happen again. Pre-pandemic, that's how it was. That's how I know Shazia, because she was always here before she became a member. All right,
You
for
can
this,
certainly invite input from folks who are not members on the committee. So you could absolutely have invited guests. They can be part of the conversation because they're your invited guest.
And we can publicize, we can, to the groups that we're part of, to say, join us.
yeah, we're talking about this thing, we invite you to come and, yeah.
We've thought about how we will proactively, connect with groups and people, have more participation. So we'll still have more people at the table, just different sides of the table.
All right, do I have a motion to adjourn? Is there anything else that you all
So
want
we
to
are
talk about?
confirmed, just again, so we have Thursday, the 16th at 3:30.
Yep, Thursday, the 16th at 3:30. It will be back in Memorial Hall, unless I didn't reserve it, but I think I did. I'll double check.
So are we planning on then, at that point, deciding on how we want to change the structure, or, yeah?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, we'll
Well, it's a recommendation because ultimately it's up to the board and that,
advise.
so, yeah, and they can,
Yes,
we can share with them, there's 2 ways to handle it. I mean, I guess if we think we can actually come up with a recommendation, and part of that, we can certainly, share with them parts of the conversation. They don't just have to know, this is, there's a lot of discussion that was had over the past hour. So the board meets twice in June. They meet, so if we waited, it would put this at their, I'm just trying to think through, it would be after our June meeting. I guess it wouldn't make a difference that we don't meet in July. It would just mean the new membership would take effect. And I mean, what we're really
August,
talking
right.
about is some seats dropping off
Yeah.
potentially.
right.
And then if we did add 2 more resident seats, that would give us time between, if the board adopted that recommendation, we would have time to recruit and hopefully appoint members by August. So that would, timing-wise, that would work.
And will you all come next month just with your idea of, do you want a 3-year term or 2-year term? And for you personally, do you want, if we're going to roll the term ends, if you personally have a preference, like, I just want to be here for a year, or I definitely want to be here for 3 years, or whatever, if you have personal preference.
Well, that as well as the structure, right?
Yes, absolutely, yeah, come with that as well. I just wanted to be explicit about the terms too, because we got to decide
If you're
all that.
considering a 9-member, I'll just wait, my 2 cents would be, if you're talking about potentially 9 members, having 3 years, that way, if you go 2 years, you've got pretty big, you're losing half the.
Yeah. I
know.
I mean,
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
9 and 3 seems to lend itself to a nice cadence of turnover.
Okay, that's nice, yeah.
That's our Q2.
I know, I was like, apparently they want us out of here.
We're closing?
All right. Do I have motion to adjourn the meeting? Shazia?
Second?
Okay. All in favor of adjourning? All right, all of us. Great. Thank you all.
Thank you.